I'm going to tell you a bit more about the approaches and experiences from UNDP's Green Commodities program when it comes to driving sustainability along supply chains. My presentation will be divided into several parts. First of all, we'll look at what is the challenge we are trying to tackle, why is UNDP involved, what is the Green Commodities program, where do we work and on what do we do and how. I'll go into two case studies, one from Paraguay and one from Indonesia, and I'll finish with some information on the Good Growth Partnership. Let me start with a quote from UNDP's administrator, Achim Steiner. Agriculture in the 21st century is fundamental and foundational to our very existence, but ironically, it has become one of the biggest challenges we face in our pursuit towards sustainability and an inclusive green economy of the future. So as illustrated really by this quote, you can understand that agriculture and especially agricultural commodities production is key to development, but yet it has a huge environmental footprint if not managed sustainably. So let us develop this point a little further. Agriculture is key to development. It is a large contributor to GDP. Over 70% of the poor depend on it for their livelihood. It is the largest employer in low-income countries. And at the same time, it has a large footprint on the environment. It is a major threat to the environment if we do not follow sustainable practices. First of all, agriculture is the single largest cause of deforestation. If we look at palm, soy, and beef as agricultural commodities, for instance, we know that these drive 70% of deforestation in tropical forests currently. And of course, if we add cocoa and coffee, we have an even greater impact. And when talking about deforestation, of course, that means greenhouse gas emissions, which is making climate change worse. It also means biodiversity loss, of course. When talking about agriculture and agricultural commodities production, we also are talking about pollution through agrochemical use. Very often we have excessive use of water in commodities production. And finally, we have land degradation and generally ecosystem degradation. So the commodities environmental footprint is actually compounded by the growing demand for agricultural commodities. And this demand is driven by demographics. The world population is set to reach 9 billion by 2050, in particular the middle class, which is the one that is going to spend more money consuming agricultural commodities, especially such as beef, is going to triple by 2030. And generally speaking, the demand for food will double by 2030 and increase by 70% by 2050. And the good news is that the private and the public sectors are committing to change. Here you can see some logos of initiatives, some of them focused on forests, like the New York Declaration on Forests or the Tropical Forest Alliance 2020. Some others that are just focusing on sustainable commodities production, like the Consumer Goods Forum or the Amsterdam Declaration, which has a working group especially focusing on palm oil. And now the big question is, how can we turn these public and private commitments into action? But before I attempt to answer this question, let me talk about why UNDP. Typically, when talking about agriculture and agricultural commodities, one may think about FAO and IFAD. but it's, of course, UNDP's mandate to work to further sustainable human development, which are embodied in the pursuit of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And if we look at the 17 SDGs, we can find links between them and agricultural production, and especially sustainable agricultural production. In fact, agricultural production and sustainable agricultural production is necessary for reaching every single of these SDGs. So if we take no poverty, SDG 1, for instance, we know that agriculture growth can reduce poverty by half. If we take the SDG 2, zero hunger, we know that feeding the world will require sustainable practices, etc., etc. So what is UNDP's response? UNDP's response so far has been the Green Commodities program, whose mission is to improve the national economic, social, and environmental performance of agricultural commodities sectors. Why? Well, really to improve rural livelihoods, to mitigate climate change, and protect forests and ecosystems. And in order to, well, first of all, let me tell you a bit more about where do we work and on what. You can see that we are working on beef, on pineapple, on fisheries, on coffee, cocoa, soy, and palm, and that we are working in 11 countries on 3 continents. And in order to achieve the mission that I just discussed, we have thought through the following theory of change. We believe that first of all, we need to work on policies for sustainable land use to allow responsible production. We need producers to be capacitated to adopt good agricultural practices. We also need investments and economic incentives to really push sustainable production. And finally, there must be a demand. There must be awareness and demand for reduced environmental footprint. So now let's take a look at what do we do in a little bit more details. First of all, we support producer country governments really to take the lead in building a shared national vision and commitment to joint action, which reaches across sectors, bringing issues and solutions around farming, forestry, trade, and commodities together. We also help build an enabling environment for change, addressing issues related to planning, policies, regulations, and their enforcement, and of course, building the capacity of the institutions that support that. We also help establish capacity for better production by improving farmers' support system and facilitating joint efforts with the private sector. We help create partnerships for change, establishing working relationships between stakeholders who have sometimes never collaborated before. And we also link partners to international donors and global funding mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility, the RED Plus mechanisms to bring solutions to scale. So one of the main focus really remains working through national commodity platforms, gathering stakeholders and allowing dialogue between them. Why are those national commodities platforms important? Well, first of all, they provide a neutral space for dialogue. They allow for coordinated action between multi-stakeholders. They also enable working on an environment, on the enabling environment to allow for change. That also means that typically they look for systemic solutions to problems. They are driven by participants, led by government, and enabled by UNDP's Green Commodities program. They have proven so far, as we've seen in the experience of the Green Commodities program to be an efficient and effective way of implementing change at country level. So let's take a look now at which are the stakeholders that these multi-stakeholder platforms engage with. First of all, obviously, government, both at the national level and at the subnational level. Of course, private sector throughout the supply chain, from the producers to the supply chain, to the various supply chain actors, such as the buyers and traders, the trade associations, but also the financial institutions, civil society, not only the NGOs, but also the foundations, the charities, the academia and researchers, and standards and other multi-stakeholder initiatives. And finally, development partners, bilaterals, multilaterals, and UN agencies and programs. So the ultimate aim of national platforms is really to reach a consensus among stakeholders on a national response to unsustainable commodities production. And this takes the shape generally of a national action plan endorsed by government. The plan has been found to be a valuable framework for planning investments by both companies and donors. And you can see on these slides that developing a national action plan takes many steps and takes a long time, typically several years. You can see here a timeline of 5 years. And this is what we've seen in our experience in many of the countries we've worked in. And you'll see it in the case study that I'm going to get into now. Before I get into the case study on the National Action Plan of Indonesia, let's take a look at Paraguay and the work we are doing on the soy and beef sectors there. Interestingly, in Paraguay, we've been working bottom up, meaning that we have started with establishing multi-stakeholder platforms at the level of departments. So at the subnational level, and the work there has been feeding the national level. So we have created the first neutral platform forum for soy and beef and departmental platform, and we have managed to successfully engage the private sector in them. The two largest soy traders, ADM and Cargill, are fully engaged and supporting the project directly and also through parallel financing. Through the discussions at platform level, it's been found to be needed to do an in-depth review of environmental and forestry legal framework, which happened, and enabled improvement and reforms in the legal framework. The work has also been trying to engage the financial institutions, the financial community, through the Roundtable for Sustainable Finance, which has been working at building the capacity of the banking sector in using environmental sustainability and governance criteria and risk management metrics, and also to try and create new products and services to respond to the needs for finance of producers. The work has also focused so far on identifying the needs for farmers, producers, in terms of shifting from business as usual practices to improved sustainable practices, and this has led to best practice training in good agricultural practices in particular, and how to best handle chemicals, agricultural chemicals. And the project, thanks to the Good Growth Partnership, which I'm going to talk about later on, is now expanding from working mostly in the east of the country to now working in the west of the country, in the Chaco region. Now let's take a look at our experience in Indonesia, this time in palm oil, The team there has been working since 2014, has established a multi-stakeholder Indonesia palm oil platform called FOXB in Bahasa, and has been working since then to create a national action plan for sustainable palm oil. This action plan was first drafted in 2017 and was finalized this year in 2018 and handed over to government for legalization. Now we are also moving to the regional level and the district level, so we are doing it in a different way from Paraguay. We're going from top down, from top to bottom here, and we are having regional consultations for really bringing the FOXB platform to the ground, and also develop strategies and plans at both the regional and district level in 3 regions and 3 districts in Indonesia. So this is in development. We are also supporting the national standard, which is called the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil Standard. We are supporting the government in making sure that the points of similarities and complementarities of ISPO and the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil Standards are identified. So a joint study was published, and we have so far been already supporting smallholders in ISPO certification and access to credits, among other things. Lessons learned on the work in Indonesia so far is that it's been extremely important to engage government and have their buy-in at all levels in order to pursue this work in a very complex and highly political environment. So the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil National Action Plan, as I mentioned, exists and has been handed over to government. I just wanted to show that it is made up of 4 different elements. An element really working on smallholder farmers, one working on environmental management, one working on ISPO, and one working on smallholder farmers. So what I wanted to say on this slide is that there was a 4 months process that was completed in order to get feedback both at the national level, at the subnational level, but also on top of that at the international level. And over 500 comments were gathered through this process and were taken into account to create the final version of this plan before it was handed over to the government. One lessons learned from UNDP's Green Commodities program so far and up to the design of the Good Growth Partnership was that, and as we saw it also in the Paraguay case studies, that it's very important as much as possible to really bring the production, the demand, and the finance together. So the entire supply chain functions to really make the business case for sustainable production much stronger, and really to ensure that we have sustainability of the entire supply chain. So this is what really was the starting point for the design of the Good Growth Partnership, which is really taking an integrated approach to sustainable supply chains, working in parallel at the same time on sustainable production, on making sure that demand for sustainable products is increased, and making sure that we have an enabling environment for financial products and financial institutions that support the shift to sustainable production, and that support also the demand for sustainable products. This partnership is quite unique because of all that. It's also quite unique because it is really working at different levels. It's working at at the international level, working with these multinational companies, international value chains that are complex, multi-continents. It's also working at the national level with governments, and also at the subnational level, more precisely at landscape level, where production is happening. And it's working with the entire gamut of stakeholders in those at each of these levels, so from national governments to multinational companies. It's also unique because it's a partnership between different organizations, each bringing in their own strengths, networks into the process, into the work we have to deliver. So it is being supported by the Global Environmental Facility from a funding point of view. It is led by UNDP's Green Commodities program. It is the work on production is led by UNDP, but also in partnership with CI in Liberia, Indonesia, and Brazil. And WWF is leading the work on demand, and the work on transaction, on finance, is led by IFC, the International Finance Corporation from the World Bank Group, and UNEP FI, UNEP Finance Initiative. We work in 4 different countries on 3 different commodities. We're working on soy in Brazil's Mato Pibas region, which is in the Cerrado biome. We are working on beef in the Chaco region of Paraguay, so that's in the west side of Paraguay. We are working on palm oil in the frontier regions of northwest Liberia, and we are working also on palm oil in 3 different landscapes in Riau, North Sumatra, and West Kalimantan in Indonesia. If you want to know more about the Good Growth Partnership, here are some links. First of all, to our website, goodgrowthpartnership.com, where you'll find lots of information, and you'll find blogs and other documents uploaded, including our 1-year highlights report that came out a few weeks ago, really spanning the first year of our work from June 2017 roughly to June 2018. So please take a look. And this is all for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take any questions. Thanks.